Coming up, we're exploring bygone landmarks and icons that have made up Great Falls' past and still shape our community today. We're talking with historian Ken Robison about his new book, Lost Great Falls. That's coming up on this episode of We're No Damn Experts.
Best damn podcast, the best damn town. You want to get up, get ready to get down. With its big wide sky and the wild river Thames, if you want to go, we can take you there to Great Falls, Montana.
Welcome to the greatest damn town in Montana, Great Falls. I'm Rebecca Ingham.
I'm Shannon Newth, and we're No Damn Experts.
What's happening today, Shannon?
I am excited because I've gotten the chance to talk with him and get to know him a little bit more over the last couple of months. He is a lover of Great Falls, a historian. The illustrious Ken Robison is joining us.
Oh, Ken Robison. Happy Friday.
Thanks for being here.
Great to be with you.
Yes. And we are talking. So, Ken, you're a man of many talents and interests. You can talk on a lot of subjects, but you have not one, but two books coming out this year. But let's talk about the one that is just coming out called Lost Great Falls. Tell us about your book.
Before you tell us about your book, Ken.
I'll be delighted to, and I will. I'll start off by saying that the cover has a dam on it.
Ooh, yay! How appropriate.
It's the Black Eagle Dam, and
Yes.
it's a wonderful painting that Brian Morger, our terrific artist, did years ago when he was doing that incredible series of art on historic buildings in Great Falls, the Opera House and the Rainbow, and I don't know how many he did of it, but a dozen or so. And this one happened to resonate with me for a number of reasons, but let's say the telling reason was my last chapter in Lost Great Falls is all about the sad loss of the big stack. Mm-hmm. And, of course, what that did to the community in terms of kind of blasting the Great Falls morale and pride. It was a loss of the 2,000 or 3,000 jobs in addition to that symbol, that iconic landmark that, I remember. I'm old enough to remember driving from our farm in Choteau County to Great Falls, and my sister and I'd have a contest of who could spot the stack first.
Nice. Did you get the best of her most of the time?
No, I think we tied.
Okay.
It was so big and you saw it so far out that, it was almost like a no-brainer. So, but what I wanted to do in this first book, and I will say the second book is Hidden Stories or Hidden Histories of Great Falls. I tell history through stories. So if I say stories instead of histories, that's
Same thing.
so
Same
be
thing.
it. But with that second book, I can do some, I'm going to challenge Great Falls residents, especially old-timers, of how many remember the stories that I'm going to present in that, because a lot of Great Falls history's been hidden, and it's sad that that's the case because we've had great stories. We were too late in being formed as a city to have vigilantes and gold stampedes and the things that Bannock and Virginia City and Helena had. But when we came online in 1884, we've been bursting with energy ever since. With the dams and the power they produced and the industry that we had. And oh, by the way, the Montana copper story is not Butte copper, period.
No. Oh.
It's Butte copper mined in Butte, refined in Anaconda. Smelted in Anaconda and refined in Great Falls, Montana.
Oh.
And every inch of the copper wire that wired the world during the electrical revolution of the 1890s and early 1900s came out of the refineries in Great Falls, Montana.
You're welcome,
So-
world.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
That's the Montana copper story. It was incredibly important nationally. And in the world wars, those shells that were fired first in the First World War and then in the Second, they came from copper that came out of the refineries in Great Falls. So, yeah, it was mined in Butte, smelled it in Anaconda, but the finished product came out of Great Falls.
Wow.
And Butte needs to learn how to tell that story,
Yeah, Butte. Come on.
the complete story, not just Butte copper.
That's right.
Now, I
like
will
that.
say, as part of the interview process that we go through to bring our team on board, we often use this mining history that Great Falls has, that Butte has put a stake in fairly strongly. We have it here in Great Falls. I just don't think we've been as rough and tumble to own it
Right.
as Butte has. But I'm ready to go fisticuffs with Maria if you'd like to.
In Butte.
Well, and of course we're getting a bit off the subject of Lost Great Falls, and I'll return to that in a minute. But one of the great projects we've started right now is to save that lone remaining building that's over there on Smelter Hill. There once were well over 100 buildings that were all part of first the Boston
Over
and the
100?
Montana, and
Wow.
and now later the Anaconda Copper Mining Company. Every one of them was removed during the 1980s, and the stack, of course, in my last chapter, blew up and so on. But one building was left, and I think it was because it was adjacent to the golf course. It's that big, almost derelict and definitely endangered Boston and Montana barn that our Great Falls Cascade County Historic Preservation Commission are trying to save. So this is not a pitch to donate to the barn, but
But
it's
if you want
Yeah.
to.
terrific cause. In the meantime, in Lost Great Falls are just a whole variety of stories. What I wanted to do was take a reader through a nostalgic trip through places that are no longer here.
That we've lost.
We've lost, and that's the Lost Great Falls. It isn't that I'm geographically lost. I can't find my way around the
Ken's just
city.
wandering.
Great Falls is the easiest city in the country,
Yes.
certainly in Montana, to find your way around because
Absolutely.
we've got north, south, east, west streets and not these winding old gold rush towns,
Helena.
chaos like Helena.
Uh-huh.
So is it a chronicle? Is Lost Great Falls, the book, a chronicle chapter by chapter thing of we've lost, where you end with the smelter or
Yeah.
the stack because that's the last thing we lost of significance? So the 80s is when it
unfortunately,
ends?
Unfortunately, it isn't the last thing we've lost, but we'll leave the Rainbow Powerhouse out of it for the moment. But in the meantime, what I did was select 24 stories surrounding places and things that we've lost. Something as simple but as strategically important as that ford across the Missouri River that thousands of bison for centuries, as
Oh,
well
yeah.
as thousands of Native Americans crow on their way to have a little horse capture escapade with the Blackfeet, or Blackfeet on their way to the Muscle Shell or the Judith Basin. And that strategic ford crosses the river right between the First Avenue North Bridge and the Railroad Bridge. So it's that hard rock bottom.
Yeah.
In fact, in the 1970s, there was a young guy that took his Jeep and managed to drive across.
Was that you?
No.
Did you watch him?
Yeah.
I think it was 1973, and in 1973, I was in the Western Pacific with with the USS Constellation, part of my 30-year Navy career.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
my other life.
Yeah.
But, I start with the combination of that Ford and the little town that was beginning to build opposite on the west, what we call the west side now. Well, it was the west bank of the Missouri. And Johnstown, named after John Largent, was under construction there. There were several businesses there, and the stage stop was there, and so on. And of course, they thought they were going to be the big rival to this little city of the future, that this imaginary town that Paris Gibson was determined to build, the Minneapolis on the Missouri. So it's got stories like that. The first schoolhouse was a one-room schoolhouse, which really resonated with me because that's what I attended in Choteau County as a one-room schoolhouse before I came up here to Great Falls High School. And boy, was that a shock.
I bet.
But anyway, the one-room schoolhouse was there on the lower south side. That's the first part of Great Falls to build up. And it served for only a few years because Great Falls, once the railroad arrived in the fall of '87, began to take off. And then when the first dam and the first, in that case, in those days, it was a refinery, started operating, Great Falls population was building fast. And I will say Great Falls probably has a distinction around the country to becoming, within 50 years of its founding, it was the largest city in the state.
Yeah.
And that's really remarkable. Now, the blowing up of the stack and the loss of the smelter and the rail repair jobs over on the west side, those things
Stunted us a little like coffee.
hammered the economy, and the population got overtaken by that, whatever that town is down south.
Yeah, that's right. Unnamed. Yeah.
So the very first preservation attempt in Great Falls really was to save that one-room schoolhouse. And it was it had to be moved from the lower south side. The business was expanding and needed the space, so they moved it over to Paris Gibson Square, which was brand new and just beginning operation as a National Historic District, with originally the high school, the first real high school in Great Falls, and so on. So they moved it under the ground of that, and the committee that did it tried to find a permanent location and couldn't, and Paris Gibson Square couldn't keep it permanently because it didn't fit with their National Historic District, their look and so on. So we lost that first school. But then there are all sorts of other stories. How many of our listeners know that Great Falls had its very own railroad, 2 railroads, in fact.
Oh.
One went...
Like a city-owned railroad?
No, this was actually the first railroad that I talk about in the book, is the railroad between Great Falls and Lethbridge, Canada.
Oh,
And
why we don't still have that,
that
Ken?
would be
Dang.
amazing.
so Sir Alexander Galt from Lethbridge, who was a big coal miner and wealthy businessman in Lethbridge, built they called it the Turkey Trail. It was a narrow gauge railroad between Lethbridge and his coal mines and Great Falls, because he did it so early in the 90s before Belt or San Cooley and Stockton started their big coal production, and over time in the 90s, they went into operation and took over. But in the meantime, there was this railroad running between Great Falls and the north, and many attribute the buildup of towns like Conrad and other towns north of here, between here and the Canadian border, with that railroad, because it provided a way to ship goods in and out, and passengers as well. So that was the Turkey Trail was our first railroad between Great Falls and Canada. And it's a bit of a symptom also of that great shared heritage that we've had over the past 100 years plus, well, 150 years really, if you count Fort Benton, with the Canadian Prairie provinces. Those, I mean, they're still important to our economy, and we hope they come visit this year.
Absolutely. Yes, please
'Cause
come
we
see
need
us,
them.
Canadians. Yes.
And they need to come see their history, both in Great Falls and Fort Benton, and see where that railroad was here in Great Falls.
There you go.
Do
The other railroad,
the tracks still exist, Ken?
no, not that you can see, but it's not been that long ago that people would. I was gone until 2001 when I got back after the long time gone in the Navy, so I missed a lot of Great Falls happening along the way, and I've caught up because I've studied. But I believe that there were tracks visible for many, many years in parts of Great Falls, and of course there's some great photos in the book of and this is shifting to the second railroad story, and that's the trolleys within Great Falls.
Oh yeah, you
and
can
of
still
course
see
they
those.
that was the streetcar railway that ran from downtown through the lower south side and on up to the smelter, and it was really important because it came in right after 1890, and so, you know, how are people going to get downtown to shop? They'd either walk or, I mean, would you take your horse downtown to shop? Well, if you were at the Mint or the Silver Dollar, which are both also in my book,
And by shopping at the Mint or the Silver Dollar, do you mean drinking beer? Because that's kind of what you buy there.
Well, yeah, unless you walk off with a piece of Charlie's art or two.
Yeah, which could have
there you go.
happened.
Yeah.
May not have been a purchase.
Yeah, that's true.
May have been a
So
trade.
this trolley kept running, and it was exactly what the town needed to move people and in and out of shopping areas as well as to their jobs, like out at the smelter. So until the early 1930s, when buses and of course cars were dominating the transportation scene, those trolleys kept running, and they moved, you know, tens of thousands of people every day, really. It was a remarkable scene, and some of those photos of multiple trolley cars on Central Avenue in Great Falls are just something to behold.
Are there photos in the book?
Well, there's 200 photos in the book.
Oh, okay. So then my next question is, as a historian, looking at that, because there's just something romantic about getting on a trolley and
I want that back
with
in
your,
town.
you know, hat on and your pretty gloves and heading off to the store. Do you think that the technology that advanced, like we lose the trolleys, we get buses, we get cars, as a historian, do you look back and go, maybe trolleys should have stuck around?
No, because buses are much more efficient once they, you know, once they came in. But this scene with multiple trolleys on the Central Avenue in Great Falls on what page?
Yeah, what page is that he's showing us right now?
60.
Page 60
page
When you get the book, go to page 60.
It's just incredible that you know, Great Falls had that active trolley system, and it in a way we had a little bit of a glimpse of that when Carol Gamble, I believe it was, had the trolley for tours, and it was not a trolley on tracks; it was a trolley on wheels.
Right.
It was basically a little bus, and took people around, and that was great fun. But so the trolleys and the railroads, the Opera House, oh my gosh, the Opera House.
I'm so sad that does not exist.
Do you ever just sit back, you know, when you listen to Ken talk, or because we've had the opportunity of hearing Ken, seeing his other books, but do you ever look back and go, man, we had
it going on.
We got hosed being here today when we could have been here in the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Yeah.
Well, see,
Just seems like a better.
That's the nostalgic tour you're going to take with my book, because so many people, you know, Great Falls grew so fast and so successfully, and then had that slight decline that we're booming back from now, but it's a good lesson in memory for those old enough and for those that are too young. Anybody that wasn't here, say before 1980, missed the Smelter period and missed a lot of the stories that I've got in here, and didn't see the Opera House, and didn't see Mark Twain on stage in the Opera House.
My gosh.
Yeah.
And that evening in July of 1895, when Mark Twain was here, and then he went to a couple other places in Montana, and then he headed for the coast because he was going on a world tour. But that evening here remained in his mind, in his writings later, in two ways. One was positive, so I'll mention it first.
Perfect.
And that was, he thought Great Falls was such a pretty city, prettier than Denver, and his visit to places like Giant Springs just overwhelmed him. He visited people, some immigrants that had shacks on the river, the Missouri River waterfront, and talked to the children there. I mean, he was all over the town with the two Gibson brothers giving him the tour. But then he appeared that evening in the Opera House, and the building, I believe, held about 1,500, and it was packed that evening. And he was interviewed later that evening after his great performance. It drew great applause and great favorable comment afterward. They had invited him to the Electric City Club, which was a men's club. Boo. A men's club in one of the historic buildings that I feature, the Minot building, which has a life of amazing life that nobody's ever heard of. But anyway, there's Mark Twain in the Electric City Club that evening. And oh gosh, they allowed a woman in because there was Martha Edgerton Rolfe Plasman, and boy, if you ever want to find a feisty Montana Great Falls woman, Maddie Rolfe, at that point, her husband hadn't passed away, but actually he had just passed away, and she was the first editor of a daily newspaper in Montana.
Ooh.
And so Maddie had a little conversation with Mark Twain at the Electric City Club, and he allowed us how, can I pause a second?
Yeah,
because
sure.
I'd like to read just a bit of
Yes.
what she had to say.
A little snippet from your book. We love a feisty woman around here.
We
so.
do.
Well-
Yeah.
We think they're pretty spectacular.
Maddie's my favorite Montana woman for accomplishing things. Sometime we need to have a whole conversation just about Maddie.
Yes.
We can do that, Ken.
So here's the two of them talking, Maddie and Mark Twain, and she headlined in the Leader, "An Ill-Mannered Community." The Leader editorial. She had it as an editorial.
Oh.
A public nuisance. A Leader representative, me, Maddie, in a recent interview with Mark Twain, asked him if continued lecturing followed by receptions was not very fatiguing to him. He replied that there was only one place where he was beat and he was quite worn out. It was at Great Falls where this occurred, and was due to the thoughtlessness, if we may not call it discourtesy, of his audience. Long after the lecture had begun, people came straggling into the Opera House, to the intense annoyance of the lecturer and of all those who cared to hear what he had to say. Some of these late arrivals evidently attended for no other purpose than to attract attention. They spent their time in half-audible conversation and only shared their good sense by leaving before the lecture was complete.
My goodness.
She goes on and on about that evening and what an
funny.
impression it made on Mark Twain, who, probably tens of thousands of lectures he'd given over time, and that was the very worst one he had ever had.
My goodness. It's like the modern day equivalent of people showing up at the movie and just staying
And
on their
just
phone.
being obnoxious.
And so there was also this crazy little theater called the Alcatraz, another chapter in the book. Alcatraz was in the same block as the Silver Dollar Saloon of Bill Rance and the Minot Building, and oh, by the way, that and Hussman's and Val's bookstore or paperbacks. And oh, by the way, if you want to talk about losses, that entire 201 block and the opposite side of the street that had the Mint Saloon in it, the 200 block, were totally demolished. And of course, today it's the Davidson Plaza
area.
and the big Davidson building. And thank goodness Davidson has been a success, because if they'd have been a failure and torn all those historic buildings down. But anyway, that's another story. Another story is about the very first entertainment place in Great Falls, really, and that was Black Eagle Park. Today you think of Black Eagle Park as a little tiny park over in Black Eagle. Makes sense, right? Well,
That's what we know.
it was a huge park on the south bank of the Missouri, essentially where today's Centene Stadium is and where the golf course are. And that was Black Eagle Park, and that's where the county fairs were, and you had this incredible variety of events that occurred there, such as the cavalry from Fort Assiniboine, 100 miles away or more.
In Havre.
Just about to Havre, and the cavalry had ridden overland, and they were accompanied by an African American infantry company who didn't ride. They walked overland from Fort Assiniboine to Great Falls to participate in the fair. Now, with riding overland across the country with them was Charlie Russell. That's the kind of thing he did. He had taken Vince Fortune, a friend of his, and the two of them with their horses joined the cavalry at Fort Assiniboine and rode overland, and they're coming over the bridge into Great Falls was Charlie Russell with the cavalry. And not many people know about that side of Charlie.
Yeah.
He was not only a past working cowboy, but he loved to get out on that horse and out on the range, and especially with the military like that. So another story,
I'm dumbfounded.
Yeah,
it doesn't happen very often.
Good job, Ken.
But I'm just thinking, like, in modern terms, if I just wanted to hang out, because when I travel, you can see the missile silos.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I would constantly just ask my husband questions like, what happens there? What do they have there? They got this one has a basketball hoop. How come you never see anybody on the surface? Like, what's going on there? Tell me all about it. He's like, why do you ask so many questions? And I'm like, well, because I want to know. Yeah. But more importantly, in today's day and age, why does Charlie get to hang out with the military when he wants and ride along on their work? Yeah. Where, like, I can't just go up and go, hey, can I hang out in the missile bunker with you guys and see how things go? Like, it kind of seems like the same thing. And I would be met with, I think, guns before I even got to the door of the missile silo, where Charlie's just, like, hanging out and pretending to be a soldier or riding along. And they're like, yeah, come on. That'll be a fun drive.
That was then. This is now.
Yeah, different time. Also, no missiles before.
There's several other stories I tell around Black Eagle Park, but one that's just absolutely amazing. You know, Great Falls had the best newspaper in the state in the Leader. The Leader they covered social, cultural. Tribune was hardcore business, and I mean, both were really good in their heyday. And in my next book, I'm going to write about Joseph Kinsey Howard, at age 17, walking out of graduation at Great Falls High School, and the next day reporting to the offices of the leader and going to work there. So that's a story for next book. But in the meantime, but it's a symptom of the kind of people that were working at the leader at the time. It was a dynamic organization, and so setting the scene for this little quip I want to read. Fort Shaw Indian Industrial School had an incredible superintendent, Fred Campbell, who later became agent on the Blackfoot Reservation and has many descendants like Fred DeRocher, who's a descendant of Campbell's and so on. So the Indian Industrial School was kind of on the outskirts of Great Falls, 28 or so miles away. This was early 1900s. Basketball had just become a sport about a decade or so before, and Great Falls High School wasn't playing it yet. But Fred Campbell, because he had a student who had been at Carlisle and now was on his staff at, Josephine Langley was on his staff at Fort Shaw, was teaching the Native American girls basketball. And it just took off. They loved it, and yet they didn't have a decent place to play out there. And oh, by the way, this was before buses, so visiting teams like other high schools coming to play them would come by train to Great Falls, but it was a tough trip out there, so they didn't hold their games out there. They held their games in good weather at Black Eagle Park on the hard dirt. But in the bad weather and during the winter, they'd play at Luther's Hall, which is another incredible story in the book. But so the Fort Shaw Indian girls got so popular with Great Falls residents because they were playing all their games here. They were the Great Falls home team, and there'd be 800 to 1,000 at their games. There'd be 700 or 800 jammed into Luther's Hall watching their games. And they were so good that the other high schools around Montana couldn't beat them. And they'd also play Missoula and Bozeman colleges. And in most cases, they'd win those games. In fact, they were so good that a few years later, the high school group, the white high school group, got together and decided that they could no longer play Fort Shaw. But back when they were playing, here was a game at the very first game at Luther's Hall. It was the very first game of basketball in Great Falls, and the Fort Shaw girls were playing. And the leader reporter reported, talk about excitement, 2 wrestling matches, a football slaughter, 3 ping pong tournaments, a ladies' wrist contest, a pink tea, and 1 Schubert music recital combined would fall short in comparison with 1 game of basketball as it's played. It was the first game ever seen in Great Falls, but there will be others. 540 people paid cash at the box office for admission last night, besides those who'd already purchased tickets previously. So there were over 700 people present, and the hall was packed like a sardine box. It was a success from a box office standpoint, and the shouting and enthusiasm would indicate that it was also a success from the audience point of view. Now, those girls, I believe it was the next year, they raised money by having a barnstorm starting in Fort Benton and going on through the High Line, stopping at all the town for exhibition games. They raised money so they were able, Superintendent Campbell was able to take them to the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, and that's where they are renowned as the world champion girls basketball team. I mean, incredible story. And they were Great Falls home team for several years until the high schools finally got with it here and started basketball. So
Ken, back in Fort Shaw is what, 20?
It's about 28 or so.
6, I was going to say 26, 28 miles from Great Falls. When Fort Shaw was in its heyday, I'll say, how big was Fort Shaw compared to Great Falls? Because today, Great Falls kind of just encompasses a lot of these small towns. When you talk about Great Falls, it's Fort Shaw, it's Sun River, it's Sun Prairie, it's Vaughan, it's...
Well, Fort Shaw was a military post.
Yeah.
It was the Queen of Montana military post, and named after the hero of Camp Wagner, Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, who led the first black regiment raised in the North into battle at Camp Wagner. I tell about that in one of my Montana Civil War books. But anyway, since it was a military post, there was no town there. The closest town was Sun River, right at the crossing, and it was small, maybe 50 or 100 people.
Okay.
And it was mainly because of the huge ranching operations that were going on. J.C. Adams with that great stone barn that's right out of town
Love that
here.
barn.
And ranchers like Robert Ford that became a businessman here in Great Falls, and the Fords went into banking in a big way in Great Falls, but that came out of the cattle business that they'd had in Sun River before.
So when did the town build up in Fort Shaw? Because there's people there now. I mean, like houses and...
Yeah, it began to build up after the military post was reduced.
Oh, okay.
The original military post encompassed a large area around the actual military base. And when in 1891 the post was disestablished and the whole footprint was much reduced, and that's when the town started to build up at Fort Shaw.
See, the things you never knew.
I think so. Ken, how did you decide which stories were going to go in this book?
It was tough. I wanted to have a variety. I think my publisher wanted me to produce a book that only had a bunch of buildings that were lost. I didn't want that. I wanted to have cultural things like the Electric City Club.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Electric City Club had this African-American steward that was beloved, and he and his wife were the first African-Americans to reside in Great Falls, and they led the black community through the early decade and a half or so. And he'd had a fascinating life after he'd been freed from slavery. He'd been on riverboats and all kinds of things. So he's got an interesting story, but the club had, and there were these stories around the club, like the one with Mark Twain. And so the hardest part was eliminating the YWCA, which was an incredible building down on Second Avenue North, right? And it was a compelling story. It was so important. Of course, the YWCA continues to be in the community, but the YWCA or YMCA ended, I think, with the building when it came down. The St. Thomas Orphanage was another. I did the research. I had the chapters, but I'm more limited, and so I would like to have had about 40 chapters, and I could only have 24. So anyway.
Who limits? I mean, let's have a conversation with that guy.
Yeah. Why is the publisher saying, no, that's enough?
I do every year. I do battle with, it's the History Press in Charleston, South Carolina, and they've been great publishers for my books. I really enjoy working with them. They have great sales structure and good support for authors, but I do not like their word limits.
Yeah.
Well, hey, now you have volume 2 of that.
Second edition.
You already have the research.
Just to confirm, every chapter is a different story. So for
Absolutely.
people who are not readers, like Shannon, I mean...
Excuse you.
Yeah, you're gonna have to get better at the snappy comeback because that facial expression was fantastic.
This is fine. That's what I can do is the facial expressions.
So you can get through a chapter,
Yeah.
get the full story, and
Yeah.
then you can take the break and move on so they don't connect. Now, this isn't your first book. How many books do we have previous to this one?
I've written 12 books,
Oh my
and I've
goodness.
contributed to 6 more chapters or parts to 6 others.
Yeah.
So,
And then you have 2 that are coming out just this year alone.
well, I'm counting those in the 12.
in the 12.
Yeah.
My goodness.
But yeah,
Tell me before, so our listeners understand, because I want to know more about Ken the Man.
Yeah, me too.
Born in the Shoto area, you're a
no, not Shoto,
Shoto
but Shoto
County.
County.
Shoto County area. So you're a Fort Benton kid, or are you?
The only thing I ever did in Fort Benton in my growing up years, 2 things. One was every mid-April, the schools, the rural schools around Shoto County would come to the elementary school in Fort Benton, and we'd sit in the morning, throughout the morning, and take tests in the gymnasium, and then we'd later find out, Ken was number 1 in Shoto County in history,
Ooh.
or Ken was actually the upset of the century was when I made, I think, number 9 in spelling. So anyway, you'd have that in the morning, and then we'd have sports at the Fort Park in the afternoon. And the other thing that my family and I did in Fort Benton, of course, we attended movies and things like that, and we had picnics in the Fort Park and so on. But I didn't go to high school there, so I jumped from my little one-room
room.
schoolhouse to the big, huge Great Falls High School when it was the only high school, and it was big. And I knew 2 kids in the whole school. My sister, who was 1 year ahead of me, but anyway. And one other kid that had moved from Geraldine into Great Falls, and he happened to be kind of a big man on campus and active in Boy Scouts and DMLA and everything outside of school. So, and I was 12 years old at the time I entered high school. So,
My gosh.
I was not
That
only
seems young.
Yeah, that's really young.
I was not only in a totally different environment, but I was pretty young. So
Yeah.
That's those dang tests that got you so high.
Yeah. Smarty pants.
So Shoto County kid, farm kid, I'm guessing, rural ag background, and then you leave and go into a Navy career.
absolutely.
For 30 years?
Yep.
Saw the world,
Wow.
and then you came back and you're like, I'm going to dig into researching everything I missed out on while I was
Yeah.
gone.
That's basically the case. And
Oh.
actually, one of the first things I did was go down to Fort Benton and met the mover and shaker there behind the museums, Jack Lepley, and made an arrangement with him. I wanted to research and write history, and so I've been, since 2001, I've been the historian at the Overholser Research Center in Fort Benton.
Oh.
And a good example of the kinds of things that I get involved in there is I had an email 2 days ago from one of my Blackfeet friends, Joyce Spoonhunter, and she said, Ken, we'd like, the Blackfeet Community College would like the staff and students to come to your research center next Tuesday. So next Tuesday, I've asked when they'll arrive, haven't gotten an answer. I've asked how many are coming and haven't gotten an answer. But I had one other similar experience with this time it was the Blackfoot Confederacy, not the Browning Blackfeet. It was actually mostly the Kainai, or the Blood Indians from across the Medicine Line, the Canadian border.
Cardston.
And Chief Roy Fox and his elders and students, about 18 students and about a dozen elders, did a similar thing, spent a day with us in the research center, seeing what we had. And we share so much history with our Native American friends because, the names like Weatherwax and Evans and, you name it, those names didn't just happen on the Blackfoot Reservation. They're because of white, probably fur traders or freighters, or anyway, they were white guys that were in the new Montana Territory and married native wives. In fact, Fort Benton in the 1870 census, about 40% of the population was non-white, and it included Chinese, it included African Americans, and it included a very large, I think it was 38 native wives and 100-some native children. So we have both a great shared history with the Canadian Prairie provinces, but also with the whole Blackfoot, all 4 tribes in the Blackfoot Confederacy. So.
Have you always wanted to study the history and be immersed in the history of everything? Like, when did this come about?
When I was about 8 years old, I wrote my first book. It was about 12 pages long, and it was Slim Evans on the, I forget what it was, Slim Evans on the Sunset Trail or something like that. It was a little Western novel that I wrote. I've always loved history, and in fact, throughout my career in naval intelligence, the admirals would often say, Ken, don't tell us history, tell us what's going to happen in the future. Naval intelligence is out at sea a lot and in on all the action, and it's a great training spot for anybody that wants to then, when they have the time and ability to dig into history, like Montana history.
You've been doing this gig a long time, this history thing. Have you seen, like, when you started, were the resources as deep as they are today? Like, for you to get the information you need to learn so that you aren't, like, taking people's stories, but actually getting to see documentation that makes sure it is the correct version of history that you're sharing?
Well, in one sense, it's been a revolution. Digital newspapers online, as opposed to ordering rolls of microfilm and waiting for them to come in, and then sitting at the library at a microfilm machine and copying the article that you're interested in. So the whole idea for either study of history or family history, any of those things like that want to dig into the past. And that's one thing that's so concerning to me about the present state of the Great Falls Tribune. Who's going to find any local news in it in the future?
No.
And to do research, it's a little bit's in the Gazette, a little bit is here, a little bit is there. But it's nothing like in that era of the past where you could go to the newspapers, and it was a slow process before, say, 10 or 15 years ago. But now that so much of the newspaper history is online and digitally available, searchable, I mean, it's just incredible. So in that sense, it's been a revolution. I think the attention span of people may not be holding up too well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many published books are getting read. But on the other hand, if your book's online as well as in print, I guess we authors have to tolerate it.
Adapt. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, when I travel, when I go to a new place, I love hearing the stories about the history of that place, how it came to be, the buildings, the architecture, the base, the foundation of how that city grew into what it is today. Why do you think it's important? Because we're talking about Lost Great Falls, things that as visitors come to see us, they
won't be able to see.
physically see or experience. But why do you feel it's important for people to know, even visitors who don't live here, to know these past stories about Great Falls?
Hard-hitting journalism question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the person. In one sense, I think it's terribly important for a community to have good interpretive signage and good museums. And in the case of that derelict white barn we're trying to save, our idea, and of course it belongs to the city, it's going to depend on the city commissioners and Park and Rec Department and others, but I think there's a general sentiment that it would make a wonderful interpretive center for our industrial past that's so invisible. If you come to Great Falls today,
Yes, 100%.
where do you read a single word about that copper story that
Yeah.
I was talking about earlier? Where do you see anything? Where do you read it? Where do you have a sign? Where do you have a photo? Or where do you talk to somebody about it? Well, the History Museum, if you talk to Megan, I mean, she'll pull out a lot of history surrounding it, but that's the hard way, and not many people do that.
And you have to know what to ask to get there.
Yeah. And you have to be working on something to go to the History Museum and
Know what
all
you
of
wanna
that.
do.
It's not a tourist coming to
Yeah.
Great Falls and learning a little bit about our industrial past like you would if you had good interpretive signs and an interpretive center that showcased that wiring the world
Yeah.
story that Great Falls should be shouting to the world, because
Yeah.
it was incredible. It's the single most important thing that Great Falls ever did up until World War II, when we began to get the two Army bases, Gorefield and the new East Base, Great Falls Air Base, that became Malmstrom, has become Malmstrom. And our military story is incredible, and we've got a nice museum out at Malmstrom that tells that story, and we do better. And of course, our mission is continuing there, because they won't let you
No, they
in
won't.
to muck
out
up
to the
those missile
silos,
sites.
yeah.
I mean, I commend them for seeing the
Seeing you
error
coming.
Yeah, the error that's
Yeah.
about to happen in me, but still. But that's so true, because even on the River's Edge Trail, where the Missouri River Courthouse is, there's a great interpretive signage about the industrial building that used to occupy that space, and
Right.
I think there's more of that signage that we could be working on to share those stories, especially since we have some of these Brian Morger
Yeah.
depictions of our community. He's a fantastic artist. We
Yeah.
have one of his pieces here at the office if you ever want to come see it. But, there's like the Great Falls Select Brewery. There's all these buildings that used to exist, and it would just be nice to go, this used to be here, and this is
Right.
part of that, and to kind of know a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Another aspect that we're not doing justice to, but we're in the process of getting the city commission to change the bylaws, the rules for our preservation commission, because we want to add the historic preservation officer for the Little Shell of Chippewa of Montana as a standing member of our preservation commission in Great Falls, because another thing that's sort of left out of interpretation in Great Falls, and I begin to help make up for that by a really, I think, strong article in Hidden Histories, is the landless Indians that first were along the west bank of the Missouri, and then later were essentially driven up onto Hill 57, and the story of that. So getting their historic preservation officer as a member of the commission, and beginning to focus on some more interpretation of that long-standing, from the day Great Falls was first formed. Almost from then, there were Native American camps on the edges of Great Falls, and it wasn't always a pretty story, but it was always an important story, and it's something that's been lost and hidden, in this case, coming out in September in my Hidden Histories of Great Falls. And so that's something that Great Falls needs to work on, as well as the industrial, showcasing the industrial thing.
How many books you got left in you, Ken? 20, 25?
Well, we already know there's a volume 2 that could happen for Lost Great Falls.
I don't know. I do know I'm not going to agree to do 2 in 1 year. That was a
little crazy.
That was crazy. I'm going to keep writing as long as I'm capable of sharing it with people. And I'm at the History Museum at second Saturday, the 14th of November, to kind of launch Lost Great Falls.
Of June, right?
Yeah, of June.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a long ways. Is
so
the
yes,
book
in 2
available
weeks.
now?
It
Or-
is.
Mhm.
Cassiopeia Books has it.
Millie.
Mhm.
Thank you,
And-
Millie, for carrying all the good books.
Yes.
And Barnes & Noble and several of the gift shops around the Lewis and Clark Museum is carrying it. And
I saw it.
The History Museum, I assume?
Ken, I want to ask you, we've been talking about, things of the past and the industry that used to be here, and that we're coming back a little bit from that now. But looking ahead, now I'm asking you to be a a future teller instead of a historian. But with the projects coming, with the missile silos, Northrop Grumman coming in, do you, with your knowledge based in history and military and industry here in Great Falls, do you see that as a revival of sorts of our community with those projects coming in?
Or maybe even a changing. Will it be a monumental change to our community? Will there be a shift?
no, I don't think so. But
Okay.
the good news is that it will assure that the missile systems are state of the art, modernized, and if future administrations care to continue a land-based missile capability, Malmstrom / Great Falls will be at the top of the heap as far as their options. And that's the important thing. The temporary surge that would come through construction isn't going to change Great Falls. I think what can change Great Falls, and it's beginning to really show is a resurgence in downtown Great Falls. One by one, the buildings in Great Falls, instead of being torn down, or at least in Central Avenue, are being restored and reused. And that's, look what Drew Hicks has done with with that Central Avenue meets, and look what some of the Inn Bar and some of the restaurants and bars, and as well as this whole talk now of helping through tax increment financing to encourage more of the upper floors of those old buildings, instead of sitting there just idling along, to bring them back as affordable places to live downtown. I think there's exciting things going on downtown for the first time since I've been back here, and I think that's not really related to the military, but the military is an incredibly important component of the Great Falls economy. And oh, by the way, military members, both while they're here on active duty and the many that stay as retired members of the retired from the military and stay in the community, are incredibly important to Great Falls. They bring such a diversity and such ideas and energy to the community. So it's, the military in so many ways, and that's why in my Cold War Montana, I spent, even though it was centered on the Cold War, I spent time and attention on those early bases that were brought into being during World War II and how important that was, and that telling that story, because if it hadn't been for some luck, frankly, in that early, right after Pearl Harbor, we wouldn't have Minuteman here today, very likely, and we'd have not played that incredible role of Lend-Lease in World War II, and then the post-war importance of the military. So, but I think the more reuse of historic buildings, I think more and more Great Falls builders and hopefully architects are getting the clue that it makes sense to reuse buildings.
Yeah.
Look at the Arvon building. We came within a flash of losing that building. It was ready to be condemned and torn down, and now look at that combination of the Arvon Hotel, just a classic little hotel, and that dynamic Celtic cowboy Irish pub right here in Great Falls, Montana. I mean, that's what you can do with that, and what Drew has done and others are doing in downtown Great Falls is what can be done if the builders and the architects will think reuse and think don't think first tearing it down. Think first about restoring it and putting it to good use, and bringing dynamic things to Great Falls downtown so that it's an in place, and that's beginning to happen. You can drive down Great Falls Central Avenue on weekends now and actually see cars pretty well filling the parking areas and traveling on Central, and that wasn't the case 20 years ago.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite area to dig into? I mean, history is vast and deep, so is there an area that you're like, I really love this topic, or is it ever changing?
You know, it's really a good question, because the simple answer is I think about that at times, and I think, gosh, I wish I could just do that, but I can't, because every day I open the door at the research center in Fort Benton, I either will have an email, in most cases today, or someone will come in, as a couple did last Tuesday, and want to research their history in the area, and it could be anywhere from Shep the faithful dog, which is such an incredible story that Great Falls shares with Fort Benton because of all the good that Shep's afterlife has done for the deaf and blind school here, with literally hundreds of thousands of dollars going to the deaf and blind school from Shep's memory. It's just an incredible story. And, you know, the whole broad scope of Fort Benton history, probably with Virginia City, that I keep trying to convince the two of them they need to become sister cities, because they're probably the birthplace of Montana. And the birthplace probably started with the Blackfoot 12 to 13,000 years ago, or you can play games with things like that. But I'm talking about in the more recent past, every year of Montana history's been played right along the Missouri River, a little south of here, first in Fort Benton and then here. And oh, by the way, did you know there were steamboats after they were closed down in Fort Benton? There were steamboats coming to Great Falls from Helena.
No.
Oh. Well, that's a story in Hidden Histories coming up.
So I would say you've got a lot coming here in the June timeframe. Kick it off with Ken's book. I would bet if you buy it, he'd even sign it for you if you showed up at the second Saturday thing.
Yeah. How much do you charge for your autographs?
Signatures?
Well, my publisher charges. I'd give it away free, but my publisher charges $24.95
for the book.
For the book.
Okay.
And,
what is your signature
my
worth?
signature comes compliments.
Oh.
So
if we want a personalized message, is that going to cost money?
No.
It depends on what it says.
Yeah. That is a fair
I'm
point.
Pay you to say this to me.
That's great. Well, I'm excited to dig further into all 24 chapters, 24 stories in that
You
book.
don't have to read it before you get to Great Falls, but I'm going to tell you it's probably a nice add-on to some of the walking tours that we have in the Central Business District.
Yeah.
To dig a little bit deeper so you can become a little bit more of an expert.
And just walk around all of Great Falls holding up Ken's book and looking at the
This
sites.
happened
yes,
there.
Exactly.
Yep.
This is that little theater that had 419 seats,
Yeah.
and they had a bowling alley in the basement.
Yeah.
And so just at the wrong love scene,
Ooh,
somebody'd have a
crash.
strike. The Alcatraz Theater, that's where Charlie Russell, by the way, after he leaves the Silver Dollar Saloon, he'd wander down to the Alcatraz, which was half a block away, and catch the latest Western.
Oh.
And there's good evidence he was a pretty frequent attender at this little theater that had posts all over and obscuring the seats. And people would complain, and so they'd say, well, something has to hold the ceiling up.
Yeah.
These people sound like my people.
Yeah.
Can I add one other
Sure.
event
Of
that
course you can.
doesn't relate to Lost Great Falls,
Yeah.
but it relates to the Montana Historical Society, and that is June 7th in the town of Choteau. There's an annual Métis festival from
Oh,
10
yeah.
10
Mhm.
o'clock until I think it's 7 in the evening. And on Saturday, the 7th of June at 5 p.m., promptly at 5 p.m., I'm going to be representing the board of directors of the Montana Historical Society and present a Montana Heritage Keeper Award to Chris Littré,
Oh, wow.
our member of the Little Shell of Chippewa, and so that's going to be a great event, and I'd encourage people to come
his
not
book.
only for the event, but come early and spend at least part of the day, because that festival is so good about having music, talks, food, all kinds of things related to the Métis, which were a very interesting, non-recognized tribe that lived in Montana, with many of them living along the South Fork of the Teton just past Choteau, others living around Lewistown, and others spread around the state. So 5 p.m. on the 7th of June at the Métis Festival in Choteau.
Well, that's going to be awesome. And you can get Chris's book too.
Mhm.
Bring that out. Chris, I'm sure, will sign it for a nominal fee as well.
Speaking of successes,
both.
That's right.
Get it both there. Yeah.
he's such a dynamic speaker and such a great personality, and it's been terrific to see the success he's had, first as Montana's poet laureate, and now with the book Becoming Little Shell. An incredible book, and he says he isn't a historian, and yet he tells a whole lot of history in that book. Important history.
Well, Ken, we can't wait to have you back.
Yeah.
You just, book with Shannon. She'll get you in here. We are excited for Lost Great Falls. We're excited for the next book
Hidden
to come
history,
out.
Yeah.
And we're excited because you have so many other books that tell the stories of Great Falls in a way that no one else can. So thank you for that work.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you for your continued effort to keep history alive in our community.
Yes.
We're really grateful for that. More kids need to be following in your footsteps. So we'll find those, recruit those kids so that they can continue on. And folks, I don't know what else you need. We're 200 some episodes in. If you haven't found a reason to come to Great Falls, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And there's more to come. There's more reasons
We're
to
gonna
come.
keep going.
And so until we see your bright, smiling, happy, healthy, beautiful face in our fair city, please keep creating amazing memories with your friends and family wherever you might be. We'll see you soon.
We're No Dam Experts is the recorded claims from Great Falls, Montana, covering what you need to know about this amazing damn town. Damn, that felt good.